Welcome everyone as you enter the room. We'll get started in just a moment as people join us. I'm just going to share while everyone's entering the room. You can see on your screen if you have a cell phone or a mobile device that is not what you're watching us on, you could use it to find out more about membership at Village Preservation by taking a shot of that QR code. You can see today is our Save the Village book talk. We also have an Eclectic History South of Union Square proposed historic district event on Thursday. You can still register for that. And if you haven't heard on our social media, nominations are now open for the Village Awards. So if you have a favorite place that you like to visit, a favorite elected official or a civic person who's civically engaged, or a business, many opportunities to nominate. You can nominate more than one entity, and I encourage you to go to our website and find out more about that. So thank you all for joining us. I see that our room is still filling up. So I'll take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Village Preservation, and then we'll get started with our main event. So my name is Leanne Gibowley. I am the Director of Programming here at Village Preservation. I'm relatively new. I just started this month, so it's very good to see you all here, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. My colleague Hugh is here with me. They will be putting things into the chat for you, and also helping you with Q&A and moderating this event a bit. So Hugh, thank you for doing that. And yeah, we're in very good hands with Hugh, so I'm very glad that they'll be with us tonight. And just a little bit about Village Preservation. Since 1980, we've been fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We do this in a number of ways. We document and celebrate this area with free programming. We work to extend landmark and zoning protections. And we do this as a nonprofit membership-based organization. So your involvement is really important. We're so glad you came to one of our free events. We're very happy to offer these. Feel free to learn more by going to our website and think about becoming a member or donating. And he will drop those links in the chat if you did not get a chance to take a shot of that QR code. So yes, hopefully you'll join us in something for the future. A few Zoom protocols. Everyone is muted and off video, but you can certainly use the chat and the QA sections at any point during this time. So please do that for us tonight, and definitely get those questions in whenever, and they will be moderated for later on in the program. But now I'd like to introduce our presenter for tonight, our speaker for tonight. Michele Herman is the author of 2 poetry chapbooks, Just Another Jack, The Private Lives of Nursery Rhymes, and Victory Boulevard. Her stories, poems, essays, and articles have appeared in dozens of publications, including Plowshares, the New York Times, the Hudson Review, the Sun, the New York Quarterly. We're happy to have also someone who is an educator with us. She teaches at the Writers Studio and does developmental editing, is a 2-time winner of the Willis Barnstone Translation Prize for her translations of Jacques Brel, am I saying that right? Songs, and also happy to have a villager with us, a villager since 1985. She is also a longtime columnist for the Villager and the Village Sun, and the recipient of the 2018 Press Association's Better Newspaper Award for Best Column. So I'm very happy to turn things over to Hugh and Michele as we get started with a little bit more about Michele's work, and then into the book talk. Thank you so much, and take it away.
Thanks, Leanne.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Leanne. And it's so nice to see you again, Michele.
Likewise, happy to be here. An
So,
organization near and dear to my heart.
yeah, we're so happy to be doing this book talk. The book is, we started planning this whenever it was on pre-order, but the book is actually available now.
Yes.
Let me share my screen so that I can show the book to everyone. Let's see, one second. Great. So right now we have Save the Village, which is out now. And we'll send links in the chat and in our follow-up email for everyone to purchase their copies. And Michele, you also had another book of poetry, Just Another Jack, The Private Lives of Nursery Rhymes.
Be careful what you wish for. They both came out within 3 days of each other. Yes, so this is a chapbook. For those who don't know, a chapbook is a smaller collection of poems, although it's got a perfect spine. It's a real book. Entirely different world from Save the Village, but they both got birthed at the same time. And are both available from different publishers.
Yeah, and do you think you could give us a little bit of introduction to Save the Village? I've read a little bit, but just to give our audience members.
Sure. Well, my main character, Becca Cammeyer, is a walking tour guide, lifelong fifth floor walk-up dweller, quite down on her luck, in her 50s, still working on the street as tick and tack, the street performers like to say. We're professionals, that's why we work on the street. And so it takes place in 2006 in that, I purposely set it in that window a few years after 9/11, but before the economy, the crash in 2008, which seemed like it was going to be a really big deal at the time. It's since been eclipsed by many other things. So we meet Becca at the beginning of a tour that she's giving to a group of 6 wives from South Carolina who are visiting. Their husbands are at a meeting. First chapter is the first tour, and then something cataclysmic happens in Washington Square that I won't quite reveal, and affects everybody in the village in a really big way, and compels the main character, Becca, to stop and rethink just about everything about her life. And the whole story takes place in the week that follows, and that was because I remembered the days after 9/11, how incredibly distinct each one was. And, and there were those beautiful days, autumn days. I remember also how this tragedy had the effect in the neighborhood of making everybody feel wide open emotionally. So I wanted something like that for Becca, that was going to change everything in a life that felt very stuck. So that's the story. It's got a big cast of village characters, all made up out of my head, but all very much informed by my real experiences being a very long time villager.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. And I know we also have a teaser trailer to share with everyone to give them a little taste of those visuals that you were describing. So let me quickly get that up, which we've loaded it. So hopefully there won't be ads. Let's see. Oh, does everyone see YouTube?
There it is.
Yes, okay, great.
Becca decided to give them what they really wanted all along.
Oh, 1 second.
And walked them all the way to the western end of Bleecker Street, which still had power. They peered in and saw cakes with the same palette as the spring line of Coach pocketbooks. She waited on the sidewalk. Everywhere she turned today, the blocks were rife with stories of lives gone wrong. As she shifted her weight, her hip bone ground in its socket like a pestle in a mortar. Fashionistas walked down the street in low black boots and pre-torn skin-tight jeans, their hair as flat as sheets of paper. The first woman out offered up her cupcake. Becca refused it. She didn't want anything that was on offer on this street. The woman insisted. The buttercream acted like a hallucinogen. She looked at the little buildings across the street and imagined time running backward. Decades unlived themselves. The fashionistas went back to whatever suburbs they had sprung from. The boutiques turned back into second-hand shops that called themselves antique stores. Then pushcarts sprouted in the street. She saw the mortar of the row houses softening, bricklayers pulling off each brick and returning it to the stack being loaded onto barges that chugged up the Hudson to Haverstraw or Kingston, where they were unbaked in kilns until they turned to loose clay and were scooped onto the bluff on the riverbank. Becca forced herself back to the present.
Okay. Uh, that was just to give everyone a little taste. Hopefully tonight we'll be looking a little bit more behind the scenes at
And let
the
me just,
writing process.
yeah, and let me just give
Yeah.
credit where it's due. That was made by a friend named Jason Ellis from the cabaret world, where I spend a lot of time because my husband is a singer.
Yeah.
And and the actors were all friends from the neighborhood.
hmm Yeah, it's been a very local production. And you're talking about, how it's been inspired by your own experiences. And I think that's just it's such a lovely and village specific thing that captures the culture here.
That was what I hoped for, and I realized when I went looking for comparable titles, which you have to do when you're a new author, and I couldn't find any, really
Really?
any contemporary novels about the village. Nope, just about nothing. There was
Mhm.
one kind of a genre novel that popped up, but I looked and looked, and there was almost nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And to continue sharing the story, I know that you wanted to share a reading with our audience members tonight.
I'd love to.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to read from a chapter that's called Ali Ali Oxenfree. Um, it's a short chapter, and I don't think it really needs any setup. And it doesn't take place on a specified block, but you can picture whatever your favorite West Village block is that has
Mhm.
cobblestones. Any of them will do. Ali Ali Oxenfree. Evening finally arrived, and everyone on Becca's block came out. The old commies with the berets and the onion roll breath, the artists in the ironically oversized polyester clothes from the West Bath basement sale, and the young families with their titanium strollers, each the color of a different tropical fruit. The vegans came out with baba ganoush. At first, people stood or sat on the nearest stoops, but then a young, enterprising dad brought down a shrink-wrapped pack of wood he'd bought for the weekend house and built a fire right in the street. Won't the cobblestones melt? Asked the kids who gathered round. Won't the fire spread? No one knew. This had never happened before. Becca smelled wood smoke from the fifth floor, looked out her window, grabbed her father's old army blanket, and ran down. Mindy, the super's wife, and Ed from next door scooted aside to make room. And for a little while at least, the old timers almost forgot to resent the newcomers, and the newcomers decided that maybe the old timers weren't quite so moth bitten and pleased with themselves. We're like a page out of Jane Jacobs, said one of the hipsters. Food appeared like magic. Ears of Jersey corn from someone's freezer, chicken kebabs, a braided challah. In the middle was a stick of softening butter, and people were tearing off hunks of sweetbread and using the butter like dip. Becca placed her hands behind her on the cobblestones. She felt the sturdy surface of the granite that was said to have been brought over from Europe as ship ballast, and in the spaces in between, she felt what might have been actual earth, and she had a strong sensation of sitting on her slowly spinning planet. The Jamaican babysitters who'd been invited to spend the night stood on the sidelines in their sensible heels and their tucked-in blouses. Sing us a Jamaican song, said the young dads. We've heard you sing lullabies. We know you sing like angels. But the good Christian nannies demurred, smiling at the very idea. The Maltese supers, with their tinkling accents, brought out a bocce set and gathered around with the Ecuadorians and the Mexicans. And then, when no one was watching, the Jamaican nannies conferred. They spread out in a line across the street, softly swung their hips in unison, and sang a song with a refrain like small waves lapping Caribbean sand. Coming down with a bunch of roses, coming down. Everyone joined in. All that's missing is a steel drum, said one of the young moms. And a few minutes later, there was a steel drum, and Dixie cups and a bottle of Bacardi and a sweating carton of pineapple juice. And they all drank through the dinner hour until the past and the future grew soft and remote. Becca poked the fire with foil, and sparks rose into the sky. Another dad brought out a stack of downtown yellow pages and threw them on the fire. The adopted Chinese daughters of the New York Times Magazine reporters next door grew mesmerized. Fire lettuce, said Sophie. Fire potato chips. Fire lasagna noodles, added Hannah. Sparks rose and joined against the sky, now a deep shade of teal. Community board chair emerita, Frida Glaberson and her husband Sheldon, out for their regular evening stroll, stopped by. Frida rubbed Becca's shoulders, and Becca reached up and gave Frida's hands a squeeze. Someone shone a flashlight, and for a second, Becca saw Camille's ancient lined face at her window, winking her approval. Someone produced a box of sparklers, and the kids ran down the street with crackling gold in their hand. Even the teenagers, who ordinarily vanished at this hour into cyberspace or mysterious outings with unnamed peers, stayed in view and helped. Tomorrow, the machines would whir back into action, and all the little LEDs would glow. The culprit would be found, and repairs would begin. After all, if New York City's workers could clean up Ground Zero, they could certainly fix little old Washington Square. But right now, nothing was pressing. Tonight was a block party free from pod tie vendors and tube socks. Tonight was a pre-cash society. The super's youngest crawled into Becca's lap, and she wrapped her arms around his soft belly and stroked his fine black hair. She'd forgotten how warm bodies are. She could feel Ed's bony knees on her right and Mindy's sturdy thigh on her left, and she looked at all the faces lit a soft orange from the fire. She couldn't remember being so happy. The air smelled of roasting meat. Her face and chest were flushed, and her rear end was cold, and for a moment of grace, the two balanced each other perfectly. This is the way humans are meant to live, she thought, close to the earth and the elements and each other. A log settled and sent off sparks, and everyone watched the sparks form lines of text in some gorgeous unknown language. The sky was having a sample sale of stars. Beautiful white stars of all sizes, twinkling the way they did in the kids' song, the way they did in the ceiling of Grand Central. And I will stop there.
Oh, that was amazing. I feel like, the problem with Zoom is that we can't clap for you. I mean, I wish that we could hear applause and we could hear like snaps as we would in a bar if we were actually here. We can imagine it a little bit. But that's pretty much the imagery of the village. Like you described an evening walking around in the neighborhood. And I just think it's magical that you've captured that essence so well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And one of the things as I was reading portions of the book that I noticed is that it's very much a love letter to historic preservation and to sort of cultural memory, especially what we have here in the village, where we pass things down through generations and we have all of these images that we cherish. And I wanted to know, how did you become such a historic preservationist? How did you cherish sort of those memories?
Well, the story starts in 1985. I was living up by Columbia at International House. I was a grad student at Columbia. My boyfriend was also a grad student at Columbia. We decided it was time to move in together. We were looking for an apartment on the Upper West Side or in Morningside Heights. And we were working with one realtor, and she called up one day and she said, I have this little place down on Jane Street. Would you consider that? And we said, yeah, we would. And so that's how we ended up living on the westernmost block of Jane Street in the 80s when it was a very different world over there. But we felt so grateful that we got to live in the village, something, we never considered we'd get to do. And so we just threw ourselves in immediately. We took a walking tour right away, which is, I guess, where Becca comes from, although it was a walking tour with a man and it was a whole different scene. But I guess I carried that idea of that walking tour, which was, we loved it so much. We just fell in love with all the stories behind all the buildings. So we instantly joined a preservation organization that had recently formed, and it was called, guess what, Save the Village. And that was in honor of a previous incarnation of Save the Village, which I believe Jane Jacobs' group at some point was called that. It was also called the Committee to Save the Village.
Yeah.
So we joined this new group founded by by a neighbor of ours in the West Village houses, a couple of blocks away, Pearl Broder. And we got really, really involved, and we were young and energetic, and we did a ton of work. I've just been writing about this in various different essays. So we got to know the world of the community board and the Board of Standards and Appeals and all the, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, the City Planning Commission. Went to a ton of hearings, leafleted at street fairs. We needed to raise some funds at one point, and we sat and brainstormed ideas. And I said I could write a letter to Pete Seeger, and so I wrote a letter to Pete Seeger, and he said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come do a benefit concert." So my husband and I organized this concert with Pete Seeger at St. Luke's Church, which was just a dream come true. It was wonderful. So we were deeply involved, and we were fighting the good fight in those years. That was just after Westway died, and it was unclear what was going to happen out on the waterfront, which was a derelict waterfront at that time. I remember going out there in the summertime. There's there were no trees at all. There were actually three trees down at Christopher Street. No greenery at all. We one day cleaned up all the crap that had collected in the bulkhead, like for a mile length, spent this long day with a little band of volunteers. So that's how I came to this. I just so treasured my neighborhood, both its physical beauty, the beautiful brick, and the stories behind the neighborhood, the people who made it what it was. So it was very important to both of us to try to save what we could of that both the physical fabric and the history.
I think that's sort of the preservationist goal, is to save things and to remember them as things move forward, and as things change. And that's sort of something, as a longtime villager, I like to ask everyone, is how have you seen the neighborhood change, even for better or for worse? How has it morphed into something?
Well, I guess I'll start with better, because it's certainly cleaner and safer than it used to be. When we moved down here, it was the era of the crack epidemic. So it was pretty wild and woolly over here on the, this westernmost block. And I struggle a little bit to come up with changes that I'm happy about. And I don't want to sound like an old fart, but I think there's been a lot of loss. It's become a very, very wealthy enclave, and we've lost a lot of the neighborhood establishments that were the touchstones, like the Cornelia Street Cafe and Tortilla Flat. And I've written for the Villager, for the Village Sun, about all of these places that we've lost. I understand that change is inevitable, but I do think it's unfortunate when a neighborhood becomes, the victim of its own success.
The village has attracted sort of quite a change as it's grown, but you've been documenting that, because you've said that you've been a columnist throughout the years, writing on preservation and local topics for the Villager and for the Village Sun. And looking at those columns, how did you begin to write? I know that you started getting very interested in sort of preservation causes and local causes, but how did you begin to write with those institutions and start becoming sort of the voice of a neighborhood?
I approached the Villager, which was under different management. This is 2 managements back, about writing for them. And at that time, my kids were in elementary school, and my older son was about to go through the process for middle school choice. And that was my very first piece for the Villager about that process. And so I continued to write about my kids who were born in 92, 95. But I also, took on other tasks and wrote about all kinds of different stuff. Sometimes the villager would come to me with ideas. Sometimes I would go to them with ideas. I wrote sometimes very personal pieces about my own experience. I'm thinking about one early one. One summer when I had terrible writer's block and was very unhappy with myself, but had a little time on my hands. That whole summer I was madly going over to J.J. Walker's, the handball courts and practicing tennis in the morning. Energy that I should have been using at home trying to write. So I wrote a whole piece about that, but I tried, as I often try to do in my pieces, to tell a personal story and then tell a bigger story. So the bigger story was about how theoretically we had, the makings of this wonderful community center there with the pool and all that Carmine Street now, Tony Dapolito offers, and the handball courts and the ball field and the playground. And yet it was the city, so they're all fenced off from each other. You couldn't get from one to the next, and how unfortunate that was. How could it was a bunch. And the library too is the other great institution. How they're, all these fantastic institutions, and yet city life is imperfect. And so anyway, so you can see from early on, I was writing about the intersection of my own personal experience and bigger questions about urban life. So that's what happened. And as events occurred and businesses got threatened or shut down, or there was a big fight going on at a city agency, I would cover all of those.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I know that's certainly been I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me. Which is, it's a good time to ask the audience if they have any questions about the book or your literary process. Everyone, I know there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen that you're perfectly welcome to populate with anything you'd like to ask. And we're happy to answer your questions.
I can talk about other things as well. There were some sample questions that I received a long time ago. One of them was, it was asking about favorite moments, places, or memories in the neighborhood. And that was one that I liked because I got to thinking, where the nexus is for me. And well, Hudson Street is one. For many, many years, for different purposes, I've walked down Hudson Street almost every day, taking my kids to school at PS3 first. And then we got a puppy. And so for many years, I'd walk my little dog down Hudson Street. And my little dog died in 2020 during the pandemic. And so now I sort of still, I feel this compulsion to walk down Hudson Street almost every day. So that's one core for me of the West Village. And then the other one is Bleecker Street Playground, where my kids grew up pretty much, and where I made so many lasting friends, and where the kids made their first friends. And it's speaking about how the neighborhood has changed. In those days, we'd go to the playground, and then after the playground, the kids would often beg me to go to the bird store, which is now Magnolia Bakery, which you saw in my little video. And so I would have to hoist a son up so he could look into the window and see the exotic birds. And then across the street was the Japanese store that sold origami paper and other beautiful Japanese things. And that was a Bleecker Street that I must say, spoke to my needs and interests more than the current Bleecker Street does.
Yeah, I think a lot of places in the village, they have that unique sort of cultural memory to them that even like you said, it could just be something so small as like, oh, well, I walk my dog along this street. I always loved the pet shop on 6th Avenue that always has the dogs in the window. constantly stop there, even if I'm not even in the neighborhood, just to go see. Um, and speaking on that and sort of how the neighborhood's changed, we do have an audience member who wants to know your thoughts on new parks like the Highline or like Little Island. How do you feel that they fit into the neighborhood?
I've written about both of these things for the
Yeah.
Villager, for Village Sun. So
Mhm.
I wrote an epic poem about Little Island
Yeah.
because I had just written an opinion piece about the David Hammond's Day's End piece in the river. For those who don't know how to describe it quickly, it's
Mhm.
made out of metal, and it's a very large outline of the building that used to be out on the pier that used to be there. And I have strong feelings about that project, which was done by the Whitney. And then I was asked to write about Little Island, and I thought, oh, I just did an opinion piece about another an art project just right next door to it. Let me do something different. So I wrote an epic poem about Little Island with footnotes, 15
Yeah.
footnotes, in which I put all the facts. So we'll see. I mean, you know, it's fanciful, it's beautiful. I love the piers. I have mixed feelings. I worry about who's going to take care of it after
Mhm.
you know, its current caretakers are
Yeah.
no longer involved. The Highline, you know, one of the things that we did in the 80s and the 90s was try to save the Highline, because we knew
Mhm.
that it was, the properties under it were very vulnerable. That was in the years before there was all this money
Mhm.
in the neighborhood and all this
Yeah.
power. So it, you know, it was very, very hard to do. And in fact, there was a 3-block
Mhm.
segment that was ran between Gansevoort Street, and then it used to go right through West
Mhm.
Beth.
Yeah.
That 3-block segment, we tried desperately to save that. We formed a
Mhm.
different organization, in fact, called West Villagers for Responsible Development, to try to fight that fight,
Mhm.
and we lost that fight because we knew that those right of ways, which were
Mhm.
federally controlled, that once that disappeared, then we were going to get the apartment buildings,
Mhm.
and that is what happened. So, but the Highline, and you know, the Highline's great. It's beautiful. I wrote a piece recently about this very unusual little bird I happened to see up there one day.
Yeah.
So it, you know, it's great. It's, you know, speaking of victims of their own success,
Mhm.
it's so sad that it's, you know, now being surrounded by luxury high-rise buildings where it used to be full of vistas. We're losing the vistas,
Yeah.
but I, you know, part of me, you know, just loves it. I love the fact that when I'm traveling, I can walk the Highline up to either the buses at around 34th Street or to Penn Station, and get on my train or my bus, and, you know, and
Yeah.
then come back home and walk the rest of the way home on this beautiful strip of elevated land.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah. And we do have actually a photo archive of the Highline when it was sort of in a vegetative state, when it looks sort of post-apocalyptic, when it was reclaimed by nature. And it's really interesting that you say that you saw the like rare bird on there, because it really did become a sort of nature sanctuary for a little while because it was so reclaimed by
We,
nature.
yeah. So we no longer live on Jane Street. We live very
Mhm.
nearby though, but we looked out at that segment that got torn down. We looked out at that from our
Mhm.
living room and our bedroom window from the second
Yeah.
floor. We actually saw baby pigeons roosting, the sight you almost never see in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just right outside our windows, and we think, thank heaven we didn't save it, because our lives
Mhm.
would be ruined. We'd have, you
Yeah.
know, vast crowds looking in on us all the time. We'd have to
Yeah.
keep all our shades drawn. Um,
Yeah. We do have a lot of comments from local villagers who now live at the meatpacking districts where the High Line was built, and it was built right along their window line. So now they have all of these pedestrians and tourists taking pictures in front of their living room, which is which is quite weird. Zach wanted to know though, what kind of bird did you see on the High Line? Do you know
um,
what
a,
kind of
a,
bird it was?
a ruby capped kinglet. It's the cutest little bird you ever saw. It's this little round ball, olive green, and it's got a bright red dot on the top of its head.
Hmm.
Just
Wow.
adorable. Never seen one in my life.
There we go. We should become a bird watching group. We'll start identifying these. Um, but looking at some of the other questions that we're getting with in the chat, and we talked a little bit about this before we started the recording, is when you were writing Save the Village, you were looking for contemporary literature that was about sort of neighborhood specific to the Greenwich Village, and you didn't really find a lot in that canon. Do you know, with your research, do you know if there's sort of a growing contemporary literature base, or is that something
Not
that
that
still
I'm
isn't?
aware of. There are probably plenty of novels that are set in the village, but that don't really feature the village.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there's Donna Tartt's Goldfinch, which has scenes in the village, which
Mm-hmm.
did not feel like the village to me.
Yeah.
I didn't quite buy them. There's the amazing novel A Little Life by Hanya. I'm not going to botch her last name. I mean, some of that is set in the village, but there again, it's not really. That's just a backdrop. It doesn't really feature in the story at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me know if people know of ones that I'm missing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If anyone knows of any books in that canon, we'd love to know. We'd love to read them. And something that I know that we've noticed here at Village Preservation is getting not just these sort of neighborhood histories, but getting oral histories. So what we're doing right now is sort of taking conversations with locals and learning about the history from like a one-person perspective. While you were writing Save the Village, do you know if you interviewed anyone else to see what was their experience of the village and how it changed?
Not extensively. I talked to Donna
Mhm.
Florio, who's also done a book talk with
Yeah.
Village Preservation. And I went and prevailed upon her to give me a tour of her little tenement apartment.
Yeah.
But other than that, I felt like my lived experience was my research. I've been here for such a long time that I feel as if my perspective has become historical already. It's funny how fast that happens. I was the newcomer, the new kid in the neighborhood for a long time, and now I'm one of the elders. So everything in the novel is just based on what I lived, and what I saw when I visited other people. A lot of my sense of the way that people live in the village comes from going on a whole lot of play dates after nursery school. The writing class that I took for many years at the writer's studio used to take place in a small tenement living room on Charles Street. So while I was learning to write, I was also taking in, the tenement life. So yeah, it comes from just real experience. I didn't have to do a lot of extra research. Some of the research I did, I'll tell you one piece of research I had to do. So I needed to create a week-long blackout for the novel. And I had managed to miss all the big blackouts in New York. We were always on vacation or away. So Superstorm Sandy came along, and we stayed home all that week. And most people were, quite miserable. And I was thinking, oh, goody.
Oh,
I just spent that whole week just jotting down notes about what it was really like, so I could write about it convincingly.
Yeah. And what was your experience with the Superstorm? I know at least I have mine.
Well, that was another tragic, urban experience that also had its good sides for me. We stayed home. My younger son was a teenager at that point, of the sort who didn't want to spend much time with his parents, and I felt like, he came back to us that week. We played Scrabble together.
Oh.
So it was kind of a cozy week. so that Wednesday, remember, it was Halloween, and Halloween had always been a big deal in our building. So, but there's no process for, we used to have little a sign that you put on your door if you were home for trick-or-treating. So we decided we were going to reverse trick-or-treat. We were going to bring the candy to the kids, and with a flashlight, because it was dark. And so we knocked on the doors of every family that had little kids, and nobody was there. They'd all fled. So that was kind of sad. So then we went to the movies instead. We went to the movies on 42nd Street to see Argo. On our bikes in the pitch dark. Oh my God, that was quite an experience. A little scary.
Oh my God, I can imagine. I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And definitely the start of a lot of different climate-related things in New York, but that's an entire other program. So getting back to sort of the characters of Save the Village, were they based on sort of friends that you knew, or were they just sort of different sort of characterizations of your own personal experiences with Carney, Camille, Ed, Aaron?
They were pretty much made up out of my head, which means that everything that's in my head was available, right? So that means they're bits and pieces of me and of other people I know. Sometimes I'd have this funny experience of creating a character out of whole cloth and then meeting somebody and thinking, oh my God, you look like Photo J. You could be Photo J. This actually happened. There was a science teacher at my kids' high school downtown who I felt like, how can you be real? I made you up. So that's always fun when that happens. Other characters, they're all made up. They germinated over a long period of time. I had little kernels of each of them. Becca, the main character, is actually the hardest one to breathe life into, and I think that's often true, that your main character is the hardest one to see. You're too close somehow. So that's one of the reasons I spend a lot of years trying to solve the narrative problems, which I think I finally did. It was working out Becca and the narrator's relationship to Becca. Melora, who's kind of the yuppie nemesis, she came very readily. I loved her, even though she's supposed to be not particularly lovable, and she actually has quite an arc of her own over the course of the week that we know her, and big things change in her life as well. And I was just rooting for Melora.
I think it's easier for your antagonist
often,
to sort of develop their character. And that's something that I think characterization, along with the imagery, it's something else in your writing that I think takes a huge part, because your second book of poetry, that's sort of characterizing nursery rhymes and looking at the stories of popular nursery rhymes as well.
So I say Save the Village takes place entirely in the village. Just Another Jack, that's 8 story poems, and they take place in this made up place in my imagination. There's some agrarian past that I sometimes find myself going to. I picture them all in various British Isles. But I'm very strong on sense of place. I really like to make a place feel real. When I teach my fiction and my memoir students, I nudge them really hard to make the world vivid so that readers feel like they're really there with the characters. I don't know. I think that's one of the great pleasures of reading stories, is to get to walk around in somebody else's world.
Get to see eyes from someone else's perspective. I love that. Well, we're rounding about the last 15 minutes of the program, so if anyone would like to ask any more questions, this is your chance. And sort of at the end of programs, I like to ask if there's any sort of final moments, anything you'd like to plug for our audience members before we go?
Anything to plug? Obviously, you don't mean the book because that's what I did in the first place.
Mhm.
Oh, geez, I'm feeling at a loss. What would I want to plug? My mind goes to my favorite Hudson Street, and
Mhm.
support the little businesses there.
Yeah.
Places like the bus stop, which is basically a diner, but in a nicer setting than a diner setting, and it's run by this really nice
Mhm.
Greek couple who've run it for many years, and
Yeah.
they're very nice. I don't know, where else do we go? When I think about the businesses that I care about, and that we frequent, it's little places like Mole and
Mhm.
Brunetti Pizzeria and Cowgirl. What else? I'm become a kind of a miserable consumer over, like so many of us during the pandemic. I consume less and less stuff. I don't spend as much
Mhm.
time in stores, but yeah, okay, yeah, Kate's giving me a little cheat sheet here.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
Maine, Malaparte. Yeah, all these nice little places that that I'm drawn to because maybe they're not the fanciest, but they're very homey.
Mhm.
Um, which is I guess one of the many things that I love about my neighborhood, that it's still a homey place and it still has a community feel.
Mhm. I
So
I
yeah,
do
what,
admit I gravitate towards Bus Stop Cafe a lot, especially there on Abington Square. I think it really is truly what you said. Like, it's a place for people to just go and sort of take in the
yeah,
atmosphere. And I think, yeah, places like that, we definitely do need to support our local community members, our neighbors, for
yes,
heaven's
yeah,
sakes. Help us all support the community
yes,
that we live in.
business, yeah,
Yeah.
the little ones.
Hmm.
There's a couple of new businesses moving in. There's this pizza joint in what used to be
Hmm.
what my kids used to call the Beanie Baby store, the Golden Rabbit, and I kept going past it and watching the progress, and I wasn't sure if it was just a regular New York pizza joint or if it was an ironic commentary on, on a
Hmm.
pizza joint, because it's got this kind of fake graffiti and the column in the middle of it. But I'm just happy to see anybody moving in and trying to make a go of a business now. Even in good times, it's so hard
Hmm.
to to be a successful business, a startup. So I
Yeah.
guess that's my plug. I'm plugging just the neighborhood itself. Um,
Yeah. Our small
Abington Square. Go
businesses.
hang out in Abington Square. Go look at go look at the monument. My husband is in charge of monuments for the Parks Department. He takes care of that and all the other monuments. And it's one of the Doughboy statues, and it's quite a beautiful one.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to go, is, encourage people, they'll just, I mean, the weather's starting to get warmer. Go out, explore your own neighborhood.
Yeah.
Um, and as we close tonight, I definitely wanted to share the link to purchase a copy of Save the Village for yourself. If you have not done so far, definitely you are welcome to, let's see if I can put it in the chat here. You're welcome to purchase it directly from Royal House Publishing or a local bookstore, wherever you get your books. I personally love the libraries. I support our local libraries. Hudson
Yeah.
Park is one of my favorites.
Oh, me too.
Um,
I'm there every 2 weeks.
oh, exactly. Picking up something new. But no. Um, and as we close out, I'm also going to share my screen for our little QR code that we keep for all of our programs, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your own night. And we'll leave this up for just a little bit. And thank you again so much for joining us, Michelle. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Hugh. It's been really nice. I'm just getting used. The book just launched just over a week ago, and I'm learning how to talk about this thing that has lived only inside my brain for so many years. It's a
Mhm.
remarkable thing to me that it lives outside now, and other people know Becca now. It's a great
Yeah,
thrill.
yeah,
Great.
it's so great to share your art with the world and see. Of course, it's been good. It's gotten such a great response. And we're here to promote it in any way that you would need. So
Well,
we're
thank
always
you.
here as a resource.
Thank you.
Great. Well, for everyone else, we will see you on February 24th with an eclectic history exploring more about the preservation of the south of Union Square in our neighborhood. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.